400 feet beneath a quiet hillside in Poland sits a flooded labyrinth. This is an underground footprint spanning 300 miles of carved rock, stacked across 21 distinct depth levels. It is the Zloty Stok mine. For 1,000 years, humans labored in the pitch black of these tunnels to pull wealth from the stone. Yet the total haul from all those centuries of continuous digging amounts to a grand total of only 16 tons of pure gold. To see the scale of that disparity, we can look at a comparison. 16 tons of gold compresses into a cube compact enough to fit inside the trunk of an SUV. It took 300 miles of hand-chiseled rock to yield one vehicle's worth of material. This staggering ratio caught the attention of a former tour guide named Elżbieta and her daughter Marta. In 1997, the family took out a mortgage against their own farm and risked everything they owned to purchase the abandoned property. They suspected the numbers didn't add up. A millennium of lethal effort is a heavy price for a payout that small. The sheer scale of the digging indicates this massive underground city served a different purpose. The origin of this massive footprint dates back to the 13th century. A local monastery controlled the mining rights, and the profit-driven monks established a franchise system, granting regional nobles the license to chisel out tight, narrow corridors by hand. By the 1500s, extraction became more sophisticated. Miners would find natural cracks in the rock, drive wooden pegs deep into the fissures, and soak them with water. As the wood absorbed the moisture and expanded, it fractured the stone, exposing thin veins of ore. That methodical fracturing eventually gave way to brute force. The operators of Zloty Stok executed the world's first documented controlled underground explosion, changing the pace of extraction. This map of 16th century Europe illustrates the immediate impact of that technology. At its peak, this single Polish site was producing 8% of the entire continent's gold supply. But the aggressive pace burned through the available resources. The thickest veins rapidly depleted, leaving the owners with a massive workforce and expensive new extraction methods, but very little accessible gold. To maintain their profit margins, owners forced the men away from the safe, reinforced tunnels and directly into precarious, unstable rock zones deep within the mountain. At 226 feet below the surface, the structural integrity of one of these compromised zones failed. Known as the Golden Donkey disaster, a massive cave-in sealed off a single exit shaft, trapping 59 miners in the dark. The owners evaluated the cost of a rescue operation and chose to abandon the men. Modern explorers navigating the deepest edges of the collapse have recently recovered human bones, confirming the reality of the cave-in. Despite the dry veins, the infrastructure continued to expand into the 20th century. Even as the focus shifted toward mining arsenic, the scale of the facility grew, with electric lighting strung through the barren corridors. They installed hundreds of meters of electric train lines. In the flooded lower levels, they carved out boat canals to connect massive, empty chambers. The investment into miles of heavy rail and boat canals appears disproportionate to the material being pulled out. It suggests a functional shift, where the value was no longer in the minerals leaving the mountain, but in the massive, hollowed-out space that remained. This infrastructure matches a massive geopolitical shift at the end of the Second World War. When national borders were redrawn, the local German population was abruptly expelled from the region to make way for a new Polish state. The departing citizens were only permitted a modest allowance of personal goods. Knowing they couldn't take their wealth across the border, local officials and families buried valuables and state secrets locally, intending to return later. When Marta's modern exploration team began mapping the deepest transport corridors, they found architectural anomalies missing from the surviving German blueprints. Several major subterranean arteries had been entirely demolished. Mapping a four-way tunnel intersection reveals a deliberate pattern of destruction. These weren't random structural failures. Explosives were centered precisely at the crossroads and vertical shafts. The placement is brilliant engineering. If you try to dig through the blockage from any of the entry points, the lack of structural support causes millions of tons of loose hillside to immediately crush downward, replacing whatever rock you just cleared. These are booby traps. The network was weaponized into a subterranean vault, engineered specifically to ensure whatever sits on the other side of that rubble stays locked away. Looking for a way around the dead ends, Marta brought in a specialist. She sent an underwater diver down into a 24-meter flooded lift shaft, hoping to access the blocked corridors from below. Gliding through the freezing, crystal-clear water, the diver mapped the forgotten lower levels. The shafts were preserved, still holding the original 16th-century wooden ladders and the rusted remains of heavy water pumps. But as he pushed deeper under the mountain, the open water vanished. Even the deepest submerged corridors terminated in an impassable wall of collapsed boulders. The vault was sealed from the bottom up. Marta and Elżbieta continue the search, methodically clearing rock and mud by hand to decode the mountain's final layout. They are now the stewards of one of Europe's most complex unsolved puzzles. 16 tons of gold bought 1,000 years of labor. But the mine's most enduring legacy is the brutal history and the WWF secrets still waiting in the dark behind the next wall of rock.